On the last Sunday of every month, Project Save the World holds a global town hall by Zoom. Activists all over the world gather to talk about their current concerns. This town hall is on March the 27th, 2022, just about a month after the start of the war in Ukraine, which no doubt will be the main topic of conversation. We'll post the conversation on YouTube and on our website on Wednesday afternoon, March the 30th. You can watch it there and continue the discussion by posting your own thoughts on the public comment column. Just scroll down under the video window and respond to the comments of others. See you there. So welcome, everybody. Out in California is Bill Lycum, the Fox guy. Bill Lycum is somebody who's made his career or maybe his post-career activities the protection of gray foxes, especially in the urban environment. So hello.
Yeah, and the study of their behavior, because not much has been known about them. And they're keystone predators, so they're very, very important in the ecosystem.
Well, you're good. We'll come back and give you another crack at it. Sandy Greer, wave your hand, Sandy. And you see me, and then Claire Adamson and Joe Haynes. Good. And Peter Brogdon, give us a wave. And Bill Lycum. And Adam and Andre. Now, Andre, I want you to take the floor because you have unique things, let's say call it a unique perspective from Kiev at a time when Kiev is presumably under bombardment.
Much new is happening. There is, the front lines are basically located in the same area for the last month. So there's not much change, And yes, there is some, every day there's some shelling, some events happening. Luckily that I live in the southern suburb and most of the events are happening in the northern part of town. So my area where I live has not been directly affected. So,
every time I call you, I always come away thinking war, it must be extremely boring because you sound so calm about the whole thing. What's going on around here? Oh, not much. They're only flattening my city.
Well, they're not flattening the city. There is, usually, every day there's, maybe a couple of cases, 2-3 cases where, rockets or shells have hit certain areas. And, but overall, again, it's a big city. And I live in the suburb. The areas that have really been destroyed were some similar suburbs, only in the northwestern side of Kiev, and I'm luckily in the more southwestern side. So my area has not been.
I've been to Kiev several times actually, and my memory is that there is a spectacular large area, as I recall, of ancient churches and things like that, like acres and acres of them, like a sort of a campus of beautiful old religious buildings. I don't know whether it was, I don't know anything about it except that I wonder, they don't talk about that much. Is that safe? What is that area called, that part of Kiev where the churches are?
Well, there are a few ancient churches. There are a few buildings remaining from the, let's say, the pre-Mongol period, buildings that were erected before the Mongol invasion in 1240. So these were, some of them are almost 1,000 years old, these structures. I wouldn't say that it's in one area. There are a few locations, there are a few ancient churches remaining, from maybe 3 or 4 of them.
It's
in,
not in one area, because that's the thing. I remember being up on a place, kind of looking out over what looked to be quite a concentrated bunch of buildings. That's not true?
Now, I have been to that place. I was
Yes.
in that place with my wife, who is of Russian origin,
Uh-huh.
and we got to visit the catacombs. In the history, it played a central role in the birth of the Orthodox Church. And there have been major rituals held exactly in that center that you're talking about, as, I don't know, Chief Archbishop of Russia screams at Chief Archbishop of Kiev, and they have different views of what is Orthodox Christianity. I think the guy in Kiev was a lot closer to the real thing. We saw the real thing. They have ancient catacombs with unique, real power.
Wow.
Yeah, it's called the Kiev Pechora Lavra. That's a whole area. It's like a monastery with that's probably what you're speaking about. It's a whole big the territory. It's many of the buildings there are actually not that. The more ancient ones are closer to the center of the city, like the Saint Sophia is the oldest. It's about.
They have deep catacombs.
Yeah.
They have deep catacombs where you can see really, really ancient stuff underground.
Like, is that where they buried people or what?
There certainly are visible embalmed saints in that underground area.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't go in there. I don't like catacombs, but I remember being very impressed by the scale and the beauty of that region. I guess you say it was like a monastery or something.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay. And is it safe? I mean, will those people be careful not to damage? I mean, if they're not careful with Chernobyl, I guess you can't expect them to be careful with anything. But are they? Have they?
The question is the practical. No, nobody's going to intentionally try to damage, of course, these historical places. But of course, you have this human factor. You have these, poorly trained soldiers, often responsible for, serious weapons. And unfortunately, nobody can guarantee that nothing will affect these locations. But so far, it's the Kiev has not been really. It certainly was damaged, and as I said, basically every day, it gets at least one hit somewhere. But it's a very big city, so it's so far it's separate locations, not like whole areas have.
Could I jump in and ask? I'm Robin Lloyd, Burlington, Vermont, and I understand
Hi.
this is a global town meeting.
Indeed.
And-
Welcome, Robin.
And Ellen Thomas suggested some of us join. So my question is, were you all as appalled as I was by Biden's speech, which ended, "This man cannot remain in power"? I mean, to my mind, by saying that, he cut off the United States from having any role in mediating or conciliating or bringing an end to this thing by calling the head of the opposition, someone who should not remain in power, should not be negotiated with. I felt that was disastrous. What do others think?
Well, that's a good opening. I expect that people will have a strong opinion. Who wants to speak to that?
Well, anyone in high office, like the president, can make a slip of the lip anytime, and it can really come back to haunt them. But I think the Secretary of State tried to rephrase it that, in a better way. But it was obvious a slip of the lip, unintended.
How can it be called a slip of the lip? He was very self-conscious the whole time, and he ended with that statement. I mean,
Well,
it was intended, even though it might not, it was apparently not written in the script that was handed out to journalists, but no one in Russia will be aware of that detail.
Starting a conversation over the same sort of area, that is Russia, and the present upsets all over the place. My family has been extending recently, and today was the 5th birthday of a great niece who was born in Moscow. Her mother lives in Moscow with an older daughter, and at the moment there's a discussion going on between the mother and my nephew, her husband, about getting the daughter, Sophia, over to England to get into a school where there's a place ready for her. And, you know, they do speak English pretty well. We had a long conversation just before I turned on to this particular scene, but I'm going to have to learn how to be able, I think, to talk with the mother, because she is a Muscovite and finds life in Moscow really much better than we might suppose. And I've got to learn, can we talk about the changes that might happen if we can really keep going properly? So
When you say you're, sorry, but when you say you're going to have to learn to talk to her, what do you mean? She speaks English. It's a question of whether or not you can speak to each other civilly without getting into an argument, or what is problematic about talking to her?
That's the sort of point. What are the topics that will open up into conversations instead of getting back into two separate positions and really swearing at each other? And I've got to work out how I do that.
Well, that's an easy one compared to the much more difficult one that I have been facing this week, which is that I sent, somebody asked me to forward some factual information about what's going on in higher education and how they're getting students to accept the, I have let somebody in, how they're getting brainwashing students to believe that the government is right. So I posted this on Facebook, and I was told that I might get people sent to prison for 15 years, that if they receive something on Facebook that is critical of the government or even uses the word war, that they can be arrested and imprisoned, and the penalty is 15 years. So you have to be really careful in the sense that when you talk to somebody in Moscow, I don't know how much of it is, oh, here comes Alexei Prokorenko. He can tell us, because Alexei lives in Moscow, or he's in Russia, I think it's in Moscow. So we can ask him. I want to know exactly how much risk we are putting people in by either phoning them or posting. I think it's mostly a problem of posting things on Facebook that they don't want people to know. So if it's Alexei Prokorenko, where are you, dear? Hi, Alexei. Good to see you. We're worried about you. Did you hear what I was saying?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Give
Thank you,
me
dear
your
madam.
impression. Are you in Moscow or where now?
Well, unfortunately, yes.
Okay.
I'm still in Moscow, and the impression is quite dire from what has been happening over the past 4+ weeks. So it's a mixture of shame, anger, and powerlessness to do something, to change something, really. So it's quite, it has been quite of course, it's nothing compared to what the people of Ukraine have to go through, the heroic people of Ukraine. But in a certain way, it is also tough.
Well, listen, are you in danger, for example, just by appearing here on this show and saying what you just said, Did you put yourself at risk with the government about this new law they have where they're arresting people?
Well, you never know, because instead of mass repression, they have chosen the tactic of intimidation. It's the traditional tactic over the past 2 decades. So it's not like Stalin style mass repression, like millions going to Gulag. It's randomly picking people. So that everyone has a risk, albeit a small risk. Everyone knows that there is like 1 in 1,000 chances that you, or 1 in 10,000 chances that you will have to be persecuted for what you're saying or doing.
Okay. Now,
But
the
you
other-
never know. You never know. The answer is you never know.
Wondering whether what you see in terms of prospects for peace, because it seems as though both of the leaders, both men, are sort of burnt into their positions, and any kind of negotiations look like appeasement. So do you see any hope for solving or ending this?
Well, it's a difficult situation, because the stakes are high for both of the parties, because the Kremlin doesn't really want an independent Ukraine to exist. And of course, this is something unacceptable for Kyiv, for Ukraine. And the Ukrainian government wants to get back the sovereignty of the country. It wants to get back the occupied territories. So there is really not a lot of space for compromise. I don't know. What I hear from reporting by both parties, one point has been mostly agreed, and that point is the neutral status of Ukraine. Its current status without out of NATO. So at least for the time being, it could oblige not to join NATO for a while. President Zelensky said that it was due to the fact that NATO is not ready to accept Ukraine, and he will not be the president who will insist on that, who will beg for that. So this might be a starting point for that. But as for the territories, of course, I don't think that Ukraine will agree on any peace agreement, any peace treaty, without the Crimea being part of Ukraine. And of course, the Kremlin, in its current state, will not agree to somehow cede the Crimea to Ukraine.
In answer to Robin's question, I believe from this morning's news, the Ukrainians and the Russians are continuing their bargaining, set to continue a full 3 days in Turkey, apparently, starting now. So they're continuing their bargaining, I guess.
They've been negotiating almost since the first week of the fight, right? And I don't think they've made any progress, but maybe. What do you think? What do you know, Andre?
Well, I would probably agree with what Alexei said. I don't think that there's much chance that there will be any significant compromise found. I don't think that Ukrainian society today is ready to accept any serious compromise, except maybe this neutral status issue. Maybe also as an option, the issue of Crimea could be put aside, because the war didn't really start around Crimea. So, as long as, both sides, agree that while the Crimean issue should there shouldn't be attempts to solve the Crimean issue by force. And so in that sense, it can be put aside. But the stumbling block right now is that just a few days ago, the Russian the Russian military leadership announced that their goal their main goal is to, as they call, protect the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic in the east of Ukraine. This is actually a significant change. They obviously had plans to take over probably all of Ukraine, or at least most of Ukraine. They were planning to take Kyiv, Kharkiv, other major cities, and they failed. Their military failed. So right now they're claiming that they never had these plans and that their only interest is to, as they call, free the territories of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics.
They're
And
freeing them. They're freeing the
Well,
territories.
that's their terminology, obviously.
Mhm.
Well, that's their terminology.
Mhm.
And and what that means is that they will concentrate most of their forces in the east and try to achieve at least something there, because so far they haven't been able to achieve any strategic goal whatsoever. Though they did take quite a bit of territory. And but that's something that Ukraine, of course, will not agree to. So I don't think there's a perspective for a ceasefire. What might be a positive outcome of the negotiations and is some issues on the humanitarian side. Maybe ceasefires in some other areas, like near Kyiv or near, Chernihiv. Maybe the opening up of communications and humanitarian corridors to besieged cities. Maybe a few more attempts to try to follow principles of international humanitarian law, but I don't think that they really have the mechanisms to follow that. Maybe prisoner exchanges, things like that, but I don't think that they will come to any long-term solution to the conflict. I just don't see any ground how it can be achieved.
But that's ensuring the traumatization of the children of Ukraine. If Zelensky continues this war and bombing and fleeing, and the children are going to be just broken in spirit, I would think he has to negotiate.
Well, Zelensky didn't start this war. It wasn't Zelensky.
So what?
It wasn't Zelensky who started this war.
Yeah. So what?
Start with that, and it's it doesn't depend on Zelensky. Putin announced certain objectives when he started this war, and so far none of these objectives were met. In their new statements, they did downscale these objectives. They stopped speaking of what they call denazification. They realize, I think, that they're not going to be able to set up new so-called people's republics in occupied territories. But they still insist on taking, getting control of the former Donetsk and Lugansk regions of Ukraine. And that's what they're trying to do militarily right now. That's where most of the ferocious fighting is concentrated. That's where the city of Mariupol is being besieged. And that's unfortunately, so what I expect is that most of the military events will kind of shift to the eastern part of Ukraine, but they will continue. Unfortunately, I think that's the reality. And the reality is also today that after a month of fighting, and after Ukrainians became very confident that they actually can win this war, I don't think Zelensky is in a position to significantly compromise, to yield to Putin in this situation, because he simply won't have the support of the majority of his own people. That's also a reality.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we are trying to work, and if anybody is interested, please contact me, on the traumatization both of refugees, and if people like Andrei and Alexei have people in either Ukraine or Russia who want to have it, on the training of what we call barefoot therapists. In other words, people who have not had training in trauma and all the rest. We do that online, and we do it for free. And I will put my email in the chat, and please feel free to contact me about that. We already had a meeting on Friday night. There are some people in Warsaw, among other places, that want it. And so anybody who wants that kind of training is free to get it from us. These are very
Thank you.
open groups, and we can deal with it in any way you like. So this is not only this generation, but this will go on for a while if we don't get it right away. So, and I've been doing this since 1988, and I'm in the Balkans. I'm in Vukovar in Croatia, and we've been doing it here, working with war victims since 1995. So we have at least a little bit of experience with this.
I just want to ask, you said that this is training for people that did not have professional training in this field before, that are not.
Absolutely,
psychologists.
absolutely, absolutely.
And how long would a training course be?
As long as you want it. We
No,
can
no,
have
but-
as
but-
many
but
sessions as you like.
What is the minute? I mean, if I start sending out messages to my colleagues in Ukraine,
Oh,
what
I don't
should I
know,
say, you
about
know, what-
6 to 12 weeks.
huh?
6 to 12 weeks, 1 to 1.5 hours per week.
1.5 hours per week? Or
Yep, per week. My schedule, unfortunately, is extremely tight right now. And in fact, we've even got some refugees from Ethiopia in a prison camp in Libya, would you believe? It's for 20 minutes a week, but we can adapt things to your needs. So please feel free to come.
just the thing is, if we're speaking, you know, this is not a very intensive course, you know, just 1.5 hours per week for like 10 weeks.
We can make it longer, Andre.
Yeah,
We can do-
I mean, you know, the need is there, but people probably, you know, don't, if it's possible to do an intensive course like in the process of 2 weeks, not just, you know, and spend more time.
Very
during-
difficult.
Is that possible?
Given my schedule, that's very difficult
Mhm. Okay.
because we're working with people all over the world right now. And in fact, after this meeting, I have a group in Guatemala. We have a number of groups in Nigeria. No, what am I saying? Yeah, I have a group in Guatemala, but I also have a group in Nigeria tonight. Wow. And so we're working very hard. We're working as quickly and as much as we can. And we'll do our best to accommodate you.
Now, excuse me, but when they do these your barefoot therapists, when they hold meetings, these are group therapy sessions, not individual counseling, right?
Right. They're not only group therapy, but they're education and supervision. So what you can do is you can bring a case and you say, I have refugee X, or I have person X who's suffering from this and this problem. And we will work not only on those problems, but we will generalize that to the general principles of work with people.
Mhm.
And it's very open and it's very participatory. So you guys can call the American psychologist Carl Rogers back in the 50s and 60s said that the beneficiaries are the greatest experts about what they know, about what they're feeling. And so we work from that principle.
You've
And
got a
we-
good candidate there to try to recruit through in Andre, and that Andre is the coordinator of a network of peace organizations throughout
excellent.
Eastern Europe and well, I don't know how much, not in Russia maybe, but at any rate, he knows a lot of peaceniks, and that would be a good place to get people who might be able to do the kind of work you do. Mhm,
Excellent,
mhm.
excellent.
Michaela Ehring, turn your camera on and unmute yourself and wave at people.
Hello, everybody.
Leave your camera on. We like it to see you. Okay, Olivia, which Olivia am I talking to? Hello, Olivia. Are you there?
Hi. Hi. Yeah, no, I've left my camera off because I'm doing some other things and I have to keep popping back and forth. So
Okay. I know
That-
people who leave their camera off because she hadn't combed her hair today and she didn't want to
Oh.
notice.
no, my hair is combed, but yeah.
By your voice, I can tell it's Olivia Ward,
Yes.
the
it
famous,
is.
illustrious
Oh,
person who has probably a lot to tell us because you've been a journalist covering Russia and covering that war in Chechnya that we see alluded to all the time now as an example of how bad things can get. Were you ever in Grozny when they were doing all these horrible things to Grozny?
oh yes. I mean, through 2 wars, I was in Grozny.
Ugh.
And
Well,
that's
look,
why, yeah, that's why I actually wrote an op-ed some time ago saying this is like a template for what can happen in Ukraine.
Oh,
Yes, but I mean, to me, the question right now is because Russia excels at disinformation. They have the people in the military saying that they're going to concentrate now on those 2 areas in eastern Ukraine, and that is what they're aiming for, and that they're reducing their ideas of what they can do in Ukraine. So you have that, and then on the other hand, you have constant bombing and shelling and advances in some places by the army. So what my question is, and I rather doubt that anybody here or in fact anyone outside of Putin's circle, which is very narrow, could answer it. But Mike, the question in my mind right now is there now a sort of minor, well, I wouldn't call it a rebellion, but is the army now beginning to speak up? Because in the past, as in Stalin's day, people in the army would definitely not speak up and tell Stalin what was actually happening, which of course made him make some extremely disastrous choices. And that seems to be happening with Putin as well, unless of course he is just, shall we say, batshit crazy. But what I would really like to know right now is, are there any signs that the army itself is saying we've taken too many losses and this is going to stretch out and we can't cover our losses at this point, and why don't we just narrow our sights to what we can do, which would be sort of a practical military outlook. But
I think that people are saying that may be what explains the shift of focus, where they're saying, well, it's almost like they're saying we didn't really intend to get Kyiv anyway. What we really want is just the Donbass. And
right.
And this may be because they know they can't, and
Yeah,
they're acknowledging it.
Well, they know that they can over the long run, if they want to do that in a war of attrition with their massive weaponry and more that they can acquire from other sources. They know that they can probably decimate Ukraine and in fact make it so almost uninhabitable and weaponize refugees by driving them over every possible border and murdering as many people, because one of the modus operandi of Russia in more recent years, since the Chechen wars, has been to seize parts of territory and try and decimate them or attack them hugely, and then stack them with more Russians as people in those areas like Georgia are driven out. Mm-hmm. So that could well be, if that is the aim, this is what I expected was Putin's original aim, to go in, take over those territories, particularly those 2 territories in eastern Ukraine, and then anyone who wasn't with Russia would leave or be killed, and then it would be repopulated with more and more Russians who they would bribe and coerce to moving into those areas.
I would question that for one simple reason. Russia has a declining population. The population of Russia declined by about 1 million just over last year. So, they simply, they don't have people to fill new territories. They don't have people to fill their own territories right now.
No, no, that's absolutely true. And they are declining slightly after they increased during the Putin years, but now they're declining again. However, what seems to happen with this is that people who move into these territories are given huge incentives to do that. Now, this hasn't worked in Eastern Ukraine so far, because in Eastern Ukraine, people who've left and managed to get out have said that life is utterly miserable there. But of course, part of that is because the Ukrainians never gave up.
Well, I don't believe in these plans to populate areas, and they're simply impossible with today's Russian demographics. But I think that their strategic military, their military plan, it's very simple, and I'm sure you've seen this in Grozny. I was in Grozny as well, during the wars, and basically the Russian army relies on firepower, particularly on artillery, multiple rocket launchers, tanks, whatsoever, and their military approach is very simple. You run into resistance, you pound it with artillery as much as you can till you don't have much resistance left, and then you advance again. So it's a very brutal strategy. It's not maybe intentionally meant to depopulate areas, but it's just the way the Russian military works. That's what they know how to do, and it's basically a continuation of still from World War II. Lessons of World War II that are being implemented 80 years later. So that's the other thing is, though, that they simply do not have the capacity today to do this on all fronts, even logistically. They can't. They have very serious logistical problems supporting their troops.
I'll put them back.
It's only in the east that they maybe have a chance of moving forward with this kind of strategy.
Yes, but you've probably, I'm sure there are reports that they have as they put it in reports, kidnapped large numbers of people and removed them from those areas. And they have reportedly sent them into remote areas of Russia.
I know these reports. I'm very skeptical about that. I know that they have been searching for people that they find, during wartime, you get all kinds of reports, and I'm not planning to, obviously defend anyone, but in this case, I think what's happening is, they're interested in people leaving to Russia. So what they're saying on their propaganda is, we're opening up all these humanitarian corridors, and the truth is that Ukrainians are not too anxious to leave to Russia after Russia's, attacked them and is bombarding them. But some people, caught in a crossfire and so forth, do choose that because that's their only option to stay alive. And in places like Mariupol today, if you live in an area of the city that's under Russian control, you often, the only safe place you can leave is to Russia, and then, try to get that. So I would say that probably, it's, I don't think that people are, forcibly being moved, but of course there might be particular cases. But we do need to be very skeptical about any information of that sort. Any information coming from war zones.
Yes, well, I'd also point out that as you know from being there too, in the first and second Chechen wars, the tactics actually changed. The second Chechen war was a war of carpet bombing.
Yeah, they did. It was the same tactic, basically, on a much on a greater scale. That's all.
Yes, but
It
the
was the
thing
same
is
in the
with,
first. On the second, they did the same thing, but they used more means.
yes, well, in the first war, they used every means, but they didn't do as much carpet bombing as they did in the second war. And I know, as you do from being there, that they suffered huge losses because the Chechens, who are have been for centuries used to warfare, and that kind of warfare too, guerrilla warfare, hand-to-hand warfare, they were quite prepared for that. Whereas the Russian recruits, who are, as you know, poorly trained, and most of them don't want to be there, they're pushed into the service. And it was a very sad thing for me to see how many of them died.
How many, Alexei Pogorenko, how many people know in Russia what the mortality rate is? We hear estimates here now ranging from 7,000 to 15,000 Russian soldiers have been killed, and 6 generals, which is in itself stupendous. We wonder, well, for one thing, Russians have always had a partiality to appointing lots and lots of people to generals. So they have more generals than they need or should have, but they're killing them off pretty fast. How much do the people in Moscow know about this, and how much is actually being suppressed?
Well, I think that not many, because the suppression is really dramatic compared to any given point of time probably since Perestroika. All the major opposition mass media have been shut down, like Echo Moskvy, like Dozhd and others. So virtually their Radio Liberty. And unless you have a VPN, which has become more widespread, you don't have access to any alternative information. And just to give you the taste of it, the Russian Ministry of Defense is giving, I think the most recent figure was something like 1,500, if I'm not mistaken. So it's unbelievably fewer than could be the case in any respect. But the problem of suppression is that any newspaper, any radio station, any TV broadcaster has to go by the official information provided by the Defense Ministry. Otherwise, they might risk severe persecution. So for the first time, for what I know, you can face some $300 equivalent of a $300 fine as an individual, which may be higher if you are a journalist, because then you will have to pay the fine as using your official position, which will make the fine probably 10 times higher. But if you do it second time, you might get into prison if you do this, and the prison term is something like up to 15 years for. So there is one punishment for giving false information that does not conform with the official data provided by the Defense Ministry. And there is a second punishment, which is even more weird, for discrediting, quote unquote, Russian military in not even in Ukraine, but abroad in any other territory other than Russia. And here, under this article, you would include any calls for peace. So if you go, if you take to the street holding like a poster, like "Long live peace," you can get arrested, and for the first time you pay a fine, and then you can risk an imprisonment, which is.
I saw one girl being arrested for holding up a blank cardboard, just a
Sure.
blank piece of cardboard, and she got arrested for it.
And there is one more dramatic video which shows which shows the whole irony of the situation is that like the center of Moscow, every Sunday there should be like some protests, and so the whole center of Moscow is stuffed with police. Those, as we call them, cosmonauts, because they have like big helmets. And there's one video, like 1 minute long. It has English subtitles, so you can find them on Independent. And there's a camera, and one young woman comes to the camera and says, she just holds a small card. Literally, it says 2 words. And she asks, will I be arrested for that? And the journalists are saying, you are already being arrested. So, and then 6 huge cosmonauts, 6 huge SWAT soldiers are coming at her and taking her away. 6 of them against 1 girl. And then one other lady is coming, one other woman. And she wonders if only the dissenters have their voice, or she also could say that she agrees with the Kremlin. And the journalists say, okay, we need any points, any views. And then she also gets arrested in no time. Likewise, although she has voiced her opinion in favor of the war and the Kremlin's policy. That's
Thank
quite,
you, Andre.
Kafkaesque.
Peter Brogdon, you have your hand up. Yes.
What I have to say now is, I raised the question, how do I talk to my Russian relative about all of these things? I have got an awful lot of comments all made. I now have to try and sort them out, but I've got to say thank you for giving me so much information. Those who are so much closer, the 2 of you from that side of the Atlantic Ocean. Thank you.
Okay. Jez Littlewood, you are an expert on chemical weapons, and I wonder if you would like to join in this conversation and unmute yourself and put your camera on and tell us what you think about what we're hearing about the potential or the prospect that that there will be a use of chemical weapons in this war shortly. Do you mind giving your thoughts?
No, not at all, Meta. Thank you. And hello, everybody. I mean, I think in many conflicts, you find allegations that someone, the other usually, will cross the lines of normative behavior or cross the lines of legal behavior. And chemical weapons use would be both the normative or violation of longstanding norms, as well as violation of legal obligations for any of the parties in this conflict, Russia, Ukraine, or indeed, if any members, NATO members, states, either individually or collectively, were to do so. Now, in saying that, Ukraine has no chemical weapons. No NATO member state, with the exception of the United States, has chemical weapons. And the US chemical weapons are being destroyed in 2 facilities in the United States under international verification, which is overseen by the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. And that verification involves 24/7, 365 days a year, on-site monitoring and involvement. So in that sense, the United States has no offensive chemical weapons program, that even if it wanted, and it does not want to, even if it wanted to, it would not be able to respond in kind if chemical weapons are used. Now, my own take on the potential for chemical weapons use in the Russia-Ukraine war is that we need to be cautious about what we are hearing and what may be possible on the ground. Chemical weapons use allegations, or allegations that the other side is preparing to use chemical weapons, have normally not been revealed in subsequent practice. And our most recent experience of this is in the Syrian conflict. And to give some context here, just last year, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW, released a technical note to all states parties, which outlined and stated, Syria has brought to its attention over 80 allegations that the rebels, the terrorists, the violent non-state groups, whoever is opposed to the Syrian regime, have been preparing for the use of chemical weapons, for which they intend to blame the Assad regime for such use. And the technical note stated quite clearly that other than writing to the OPCW saying, this is what is happening, zero credible evidence was provided to back up those allegations from the Syrian regime. And as the OPCW noted, they were unable.
You say allegations against the Syrian, did the Syrian regime make allegations, or are the
Yes.
allegations against them?
No, it's the Syrian regime making allegations that those who oppose it are going to use chemical weapons against it, the Syrian government.
Okay, now the US has said that Russia is going to do the same thing, a false flag kind of thing, right?
That's what we're seeing in the media, and we're also seeing the counter in the media, where Russia has, for at least 3 months now, and the most detailed allegations began to appear around November or December of last year, that the Ukrainian government or actors working on behalf of the government of Ukraine would use chemical or biological weapons in Donetsk or Luhansk or other regions as a false flag and pretense to blame Russia, or as Russia views them now, the two independent territories. So there's a longer tale of history around this. We have to recognize that chemical weapons use is not necessarily going to be as many people would imagine it, or as many people might read about it in the newspapers or media. By which I mean, it's probably not going to resemble the experience of the First World War and the Western Front. It's probably not going to resemble the use of chemical weapons by Iraq against Iran in the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s. Nor may it necessarily resemble the use of chemical weapons by the Syrian government against members of its own population over the last decade. So I retain my skeptic's hat on as an individual, in the sense that Russia fully recognizes that if chemical weapons are used or alleged to be used, and there is sufficient evidence for members of the international community to say, this isn't just words, there's something happening on the ground that we need to look at. In that case, an investigation by the OPCW would be the route we will most likely follow, for the simple reason that both Russia and Ukraine being states parties to the OPCW. The OPCW, over the last decade, has really honed its skills in understanding and being able to determine whether or not chemical weapons use has occurred. And they have said in their various reports, when they are unable to say chemical weapons use has occurred, they are clear in communicating that in their report, saying they are unable to determine if use has occurred. Russia and all parties understand how good the OPCW can be given the opportunity to get onto the ground into an alleged use site. And so making a claim that chemical weapons have been used is not something that can be done easily without you thinking through what are the implications of a team of independent experts under the OPCW coming onto the ground and either validating or refuting your claim of alleged use. So I keep my skeptic's hat on, but I am also not of the view that the international community writ large is without capabilities to respond to any alleged use.
What would happen? What would, if they know for sure that these got used, excuse me, by Russia? And I think that's the idea, that that's what's going to happen. What would the US do? But Biden didn't say, you know, he said we'll respond, but with what?
Well, on that matter, I simply don't know. And I think it's important to lay out that the OPCW, if there is a use and if it is investigated, and the investigation leads to a confirmation that chemical weapons were used, that is what the OPCW's task is. The task of an investigation team is not to say who did it. That is a different issue under the CWC and under OPCW. So a determination of who the perpetrator was requires a separate investigation process. And under the CWC as it exists for states parties, that process does not actually exist. The procedures that have been developed for Syria are focused solely on Syria, and the authorization is only for Syria. So the attribution mechanism that we have in the Syrian context does not exist in the CWC for the Ukraine-Russia context, if you like. But in terms of what then happens, well, it's up to then for the CWC and presumably all discussions in the Security Council and discussions, I suspect, in the General Assembly to then try to figure out what happens next.
Well, thank you for that.
On a slight, if Vladimir Putin is a war criminal, is Bush a war criminal? Is Blair a war criminal? Because their wars of choices led to the deaths of about 300,000 civilians in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. So one man's war criminal is another man's freedom fighter, perhaps. Secondly, on the poison, on the use of toxic gas, what evidence, independent evidence, was there that the Syrian government was the one that used chemical weapons in its fight? I saw no reason why they would have been the ones to use it, given that Obama had made his red line warning. And there are my two questions and comments.
Well,
thank you.
Obviously, Jez is the one who can best answer that. Jez?
Every single report provided to states parties regarding investigations of alleged chemical weapons use in the Syrian conflict is available publicly on the OPCW's website. The first investigation done was initiated in March of 2013. That investigation was at the request of the government of Syria that chemical weapons were being used against it. When the team finally got on the ground in Syria, it was August 2013, and the Ghouta attack happened. And that investigation team was authorized to switch and include the Ghouta attack into its investigation process. That process was done under the United Nations Secretary General's mechanism. Its report is available publicly. Those reports include a lot of detailed information about the evidence collected and how they reached their conclusion. Subsequently, when Syria joined the CWC, the fact-finding missions, as they have become known, have produced similar public reports, which establish in their annexes and appendices all the detailed information, including the number of interviews, the sampling and analysis techniques, what information was used to determine their confirmation of use or not.
Could you cut to the chase and just answer the question?
I
Did they
have
show
just
that?
answered the question,
Did
sir.
they show that the Syrians
The
were
information
responsible?
is in the reports.
What
No,
did
but I'm
those
asking you.
public reports show?
Read the reports.
Yeah,
Go ahead
just-
and do them. If you don't wish to read the reports,
I don't know.
go
I
ahead
want
and
to,
read them.
you're an expert. Answer the question. Was it?
What
is there
did the
independent
report say?
evidence that it was the Syrians who did the work, who did the dirties?
There is a separate mechanism for determining use and who did it.
Look, we don't need a lecture. Can you just answer my question? Is there an independent report that blamed, that establishes the Syrian government was
Yes.
responsible?
Yes,
Or no?
yes. The
Thank you
answer
very
is
much.
yes.
That's all I wanted to know.
So I would just like to quickly ask a question to Alexei,
Mhm.
who is there. I want to know, how are the sanctions affecting everyday life for you and other Russians?
Well, it's an interesting story, really, because the sanctions so far have hit the hardest the upper class and the middle class, those who are mostly pro-European, pro-Western, and they have probably yet to hit the so-called lower income people, especially people from the villages, from smaller towns, because their lives are by all standards tough, and they live in relative poverty, probably even less. They're even less rich than people in the West can imagine, because millions of people do not have access to running water or any other modern conveniences. So, and those people from villages, from smaller towns, having little access to alternative sources of information, they form the basis of support for the regime and consequently for the war. And the question is when the sanctions will hit them. So they don't care about Netflix being shut down. They don't care about Visa or MasterCards not working. They don't care about not being able to read the New York Times, which is a problem for people like me. So they might not even notice it
Sorry,
anytime soon.
you can't read the New York Times? That's news.
I can't pay for my subscription. Because my Visa card is not working for international payments. I can still pay for my for a train ticket inside Russia, but I cannot pay for Netflix or New York Times or whatever. So that's a problem for me, but it will take some time before people from smaller townships will notice it. Although there has been a lot of gold rush for sugar and other other products, other foodstuffs like buckwheat that are very popular here. Like something basic which you could store for a long time. And this is kind of peer pressure, because once people start buying up sugar, salt, it has a lot of effect on the peers, on other elderly people are very aware of that, because they have lived through times of Soviet deficits, and that's probably what they have noticed so far. What
But
little
Alex,
have noticed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but given that the majority of the population in this vast country are actually urbanized, and sort of statistically speaking, they mainly, most of the population, the majority anyway, do live in an urbanized environment. So do you think that would have any effect?
Well, apart from Moscow, St. Petersburg, and a couple of other cities with more than 1 million people, the situation is not very different between smaller towns and villages, between rural areas and like the small town Russia, because in terms of their access to information, any political activists who represent an alternative viewpoint are much easier to persecute in smaller towns than there in Moscow. So they mostly have to basically rely on the federal television, which is immensely full of propaganda. So it's like from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Propaganda talk shows with lots of shouting, lots of other propaganda tricks, lots of fakes, and so people in most parts of the country do not have access to any information other than that. Especially now, given that opposition media have been suppressed or closed down.
But Alexei, when you go out shopping and your friends go out shopping, what differences do you see now after the sanctions?
Oh, well, I live near Moscow, and I've noticed that in some shops, the shelves have been half empty for a certain period of time, but still most of the basic foodstuffs are still there. Most people would not care here about having the best quality foodstuffs. Some basic foodstuffs will suffice for most people, so they don't really, as is the case with Netflix, they don't really notice that probably some imported foodstuffs are not there. Their favorite coffee is not on the shelf anymore, and that is again a problem of addressing those people who do not care for many reasons.
But the value of the ruble doesn't affect them.
First, the ruble started falling, but now it has regained some ground, and it now has strengthened a little bit, although not to where it was before the war. So the inflation was not as dramatic as one might have feared.
Thanks.
Now, you mentioned
you.
that it's the rural population or the poorer classes that are not that are supporting the government, where the urban and educated people are more in opposition.
Mm-hmm.
How much is that holding up? I made some contacts this past week that shook me, because some of the people that I had recognized as very close old friends who were very pro-democracy and very critical of Putin are now very much in favor of his position on the war. and very angry with me for calling them and putting information out there that, well, now then, so what I wanted to know is I didn't know, I couldn't decide whether they are suddenly becoming scared that they're going to be hauled off to prison. And that's why they seem to be pro-war, pro-Putin, or whether they really have been persuaded by the government's propaganda or censorship, or maybe for some other ideological reason, they've made this turnabout to at least appearing to be extremely favorable toward the regime now and toward the war. And I don't even know how to read it. You know, Peter Brogdon was asking, how do you speak to these people? That's the kind of question that I had to face, because I didn't know how to interpret their bizarre reversal. I mean, some of these people got really angry with me, and I didn't know what to make of that, because it came from a direction that I had never, I'd never seen them take such a position before. Can you guess as to whether or not the government's intimidation is succeeding to the point that a telephone or certainly a Facebook interaction is dangerous for them, and they're actually covering, lying to pretend to save their skin?
Well, I think that Facebook is not dangerous right now, because the only way you can access Facebook at this moment is via VPN. And if you've got a good VPN, you're mostly out of control.
I sent posts by Facebook to some people, and they got them. Some of these people thanked me, and some of them absolutely didn't. And I don't, but they got them, I think. And that's what I don't know. I don't know what to make of their responses.
As for the fears that you're mentioning, I would rather suggest that people who fear some persecution would rather escape that kind of conversation. They will be like, well, I don't know, everyone might be lying, we don't have all the information, we don't know whom to believe. That would be a symptom of a scared person. Those who are really aggressive, and I have to tell you that the level of aggression has been generally high since at least 2014, but in the past month it has been immensely high. Like, it has hit every kinds of ceiling. So it's the air here is electricized with aggression. People lose the ability to talk reason to each other. Every discussion turns out to be a brawl, if not, or at the best case, an argument. The people who are getting angry at the opposite view, I think they're rather sincere. And here we might come to the methods that the propaganda is using, because I guess that it employs all the tricks that have been developed, including military propaganda tricks, how to persuade people to follow your course of thought. And I think I have no access to, of course, to the particular information of how propaganda works, but from what I observe, I think that they have ways to address both like poor, uneducated people, and on another level, they are quite successful in sending a message to more sophisticated, if I may say so, people, mentioning history, mentioning like some participation in a grand cause, which may speak to certain people, which may in some way make them feel that this is a this is how they make up for the perceived humiliation of the perestroika in the 90s. Lots of intelligentsia people could really listen to that, unfortunately.
Fascinating. Thank you.
That's what I think there's going to be lots of sociology studies following the in the wake of the war, following the really dramatic stage of the war, because now when the people are when this all is happening, it's difficult to make conclusions, but I think this has to be studied in far more depth. How it happened, why, and what to do to prevent, what needs to be done to prevent this in the future.
Andrei Kameshikov, I'd be curious to hear your comparison of the emotional tension in Kyiv with what we've just heard about how electric and the amount of hostility and aggressiveness in everyday conversations in Moscow. My impression is that the Ukrainians are pretty united. And if somebody goes around, I don't know whether you heard anybody make any comments that would be contrary to the government's position, but is there any repression of information by the regime? And is there any social pressure to conform of the scale that Andrei has just been describing?
Well, there definitely is social pressure. There have been crackdowns. I just like a few hours read about one guy being detained that was often on Russian TV. He was supposedly a political analyst, but he always had a very, from my perspective, very weird, I don't know if you can call it pro-Russian, but very,
Speak a little louder.
Yeah, well, he was always very skeptical, and he was often on Russian TV. The question that they're trying to figure out is, was he actually, involved in, getting money from Russian secret services or whatever? And yes, there are tensions. There were some very nasty cases where members of parliament were humiliated. Members of parliament who came from the so-called opposition platform, which was seen as this formally kind of pro-Russian, it got most of its votes in the east of Ukraine, and so today some people are blaming these folks for that it was their position. In the Ukrainian parliament, there was I think the largest opposition faction was representing the so-called opposition bloc, and these were people from the east of Ukraine, mainly some former oligarchs, some people that had a position that was seen as relatively pro-Russian, not in the sense that and there were a few cases where these members of parliament were humiliated by, armed men at checkpoints and things like that. Even though the day that the war began, all factions in the parliament united and said that now they're all united, in defense of their country. So yes, there are tensions, and there will be tensions, and Ukraine, there are different factions, and we see all these things, but it's hard to, in a sense, the government does have a point when it says, we're in war, so unfortunately, so we can't allow the level of freedom of speech and democracy as usually is the case. I don't know. You can argue against that. Personally, I don't think that's a justified position, but it's, it can be understood under the circumstances. Let's put it like that.
Mhm. Thank you. Okay, Douglas Jack.
Yeah. Hands up.
Just unmuting. So I've noticed in Canadian media, whether it's CBC or the private media or the newspapers, our media is totally full of propaganda. There's not one page or 1 hour that doesn't have multiple sides going through. So when this comes down to the court of public opinion, my question to the group would be, what will it take for us to get Justin Trudeau or Biden to debate with Putin? And shouldn't that be a human obligation, especially in a war of public opinion? And it seems to me that the actual war that we're experiencing, the last dozen wars that we're experiencing have been very heavy on trying to convince, whether it's through false flag chemical attacks, in the false flags in Syria or elsewhere. We're in an information war. So I'm going to throw it open to the group. What will it take us to get past that with full debate happening, open public debate, not behind closed doors, but that we should be requiring our leaders and actually all of us to sit down and debate with each other?
Okay, thank you. And Dennis O'Connor.
Regarding propaganda, I'd recommend John Mearsheimer's lecture of 2014. And he says why the West is responsible for the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. And he predicted what was going to happen if NATO kept increasingly getting involved with Ukraine. And he said Russia would take terrible action in the east of Ukraine and they would wreck the rest of the place. And he put the blame on the West and NATO not paying attention over a whole decade, 20 years. So we don't see that kind of propaganda, if we call his lecture propaganda, on CNN. In other words, I'm saying to you, Meta, do you feel you're immune from Western propaganda? Because I don't see a balance in the treatment of how Putin is described as a war criminal, which seems to be a question you don't wish to discuss. Whereas I think it would be appropriate for any independent reporter to say, well, if Mr. Putin is a war criminal, how come Bush and Blair are not war criminals? How come the bombing, the dropping of 1-ton Canadian bombs on Libya in the interest of regime change is not a war crime? So I think war criminality is as important a topic as shopping in Moscow right now.
Okay, anybody else?
Well, in absence of anyone else talking, I kind of reject some of Dennis's premise, but accept other parts. The equivalence of what Putin is doing, which could be called war criminality, as opposed to those other previous examples, including some American doings. And it's certainly a matter of comparison and definition. I think that our press, though, is quite objective. Certainly the CBC news on the television, I would accept as objective as possible. And regarding Dennis's question, why don't Trudeau and Biden go and talk with Putin? They have done that before the war began several times. Biden was talking directly with Putin, and about 3 days before Putin started, for those 3 days, Biden said, as a result of his conversations with Putin, Putin was going to start the war, and Putin did. ongoing, what's the word? Not advocacy, but diplomacy. Diplomacies at every level is constantly being tried. Evidently, the only thing right now with close bargaining diplomacy is what's going on between Ukraine and Russia, now in Turkey for 2 or 3 days. But every aspect of diplomacy has been used and just about exhausted by the NATO and the EU. And if you would like something to hear that I thought was quite remarkable, was Trudeau's address to the EU and then later to NATO, whereas he took the broad perspective of long-term needing of peace, of fighting climate change, all of this, and put the Ukraine war into context, and with the with purposely avoiding anything that could possibly escalate the tension between NATO and Russia, because we do not want this third world war or any possibility of those nuclear weapons going off, because they could terminate humanity.
Thank you, Robert.
Could I just have a brief answer to a point?
Yes.
I'm with Mearsheimer, and I'm giving an explanation as to what Russia has done and will do. It is not an excuse, it's an explanation. So Professor Mearsheimer's lecture is online. Secondly, it wasn't I who proposed that Biden would meet with Putin, but I'd be interested to hear how come Blair and Bush are not regarded as war criminals. Their wars resulted in 300,000 civilians, Arab civilians, people who don't look like, quotes, us, being killed. In Fallujah, in the Battle of Fallujah alone, a general on CNN about a week ago was boasting on the technicalities of taking Kiev. He said, quotes, "It took us 3 weeks to take Fallujah. There were only 30,000 homes in Fallujah." And I looked up the war details. 600 civilians died in that one small area of Iraq alone, because 4 Marines had been killed. And they were chasing after insurgents who were people in Iraq who didn't want to be occupied. And yet, ultimately, those guys, Bush and Blair, are not regarded as war criminals. And you, Meta, seem to feel that that's an unfair topic for discussion. I think it's a very relevant topic for discussion. And I don't see the gentleman who spoke last giving me any evidence as to what the qualitative difference was between Bush and Blair, their illegal war as declared by Kofi Annan, and what's happening today. So if Putin is a war criminal, Bush and Blair are war criminals. I'm open to a rational discussion.
Yes, but over time, these incidents happen various places, and the flavor of all of them is continuation of what's called war in various places. And many people in the world right now are working to try to end all wars and have permanent peace. And this is the long-term goal. And I would agree with Dennis, all of these things just have to cease. Let's look toward the future.
Thank you.
Here.
Anybody else? I would think that probably some people have other things that we want to cover.
I'd like to speak.
Yes, Sandy, yes.
Yes. Oh, yes. Well, with all due respect to what Dennis would prefer to speak about right now, I would like to be more respectful to the presence of both Andre and Alexei and the current crisis happening in Ukraine. And I learned something new this afternoon from Alexei about the reality that the economic sanctions are, which are intended to really put enough pressure on Russia as a nation state to stop the violence against Ukraine, in fact, is also hurting people who actually are against the war against Ukraine, the Russian people such as Alexei, and that he is not able to facilitate getting international news information because he also is affected by these sanctions. However, if I also appreciate that all of these economic sanctions are being used to minimize the possibility of war that could involve eventually nuclear warfare, which nobody wants, so that as many economic sanctions as possible are being used. So I wanted to ask both Alexei, first of all, Alexei, and then Andre, if there's any way to resolve the situation where people in Russia who are totally in opposition to warring against the Ukrainian people, is there some way that those of us in the West, like in North America here, could be helping to, I don't know if there's any resolution to the fact that, individuals such as yourself are being shut out of trying to get more information and to be more empowered to help you to fight against the war. Is there anything that we could do? I don't know.
Are you asking, is there anything we can do to inform other people, or are you asking whether you think we are as constrained and limited in access to the full picture as they are?
Well, there's that too, because, for example, so I'm just finding out today about the reality that the economic sanctions against Russia are affecting all Russian people, including those who are against the war against the Ukraine, the Russian war against Ukraine. And so I don't know if that can be changed. So I'm asking more about how does Alexei feel his hands are being tied, perhaps, aside from being able to participate in this video, which is fantastic. And bless you for being with us today and helping us understand everything more deeply. And I love this conversation of that having you as a Russian person and Andre as a Ukrainian person able to be in a dialogue and having the same point of view about that this war is morally wrong and that we're all witnessing that. And thank you for that. So Alexei, would you like to respond?
Well, thank you for your warm words, your support, among other things. It means a lot, really. I'm sincere about this. Every word of support really counts now. Every word of support that I'm sending to my Ukrainian friends, we've become, I haven't lost a single Ukrainian friend over this month. We've become, in fact, closer to each other. I've lost some Russian friends, in fact, but I don't care much about it because I will give people chances, and if they haven't done anything really wrong, if they repent for their views later, I will leave my door on my side. The door will be open for them, as I did after 2014. I also lost many friends, many valuable friendships after 2014, after the Crimea. As for the sanctions, I would really like not to be misunderstood. I do not complain about them at all, because all my thoughts are with the people of Ukraine right now, with the people in Mariupol, with the people in Kyiv. So I have nothing to complain about. It would be ridiculous if I complained about not being able to use the Google Pay or Apple Pay when people are risking their houses being bombed, or if they wake up in the morning, they don't know if they will live it to the evening. As for the sanctions, there is no real way to direct them at a specific group of people. All the sanctions worldwide have been targeted at specific countries. And in that country, the authorities have the full power to distribute them as they seem fit. For example, most of the sanctions after 2014 have been directed at the so-called oligarchs, the ruling class, and the latter, the ruling class, did a lot of put a lot of effort into spreading the burden of the sanctions among the people across the whole, like millions of people, to show that we are in the same boat. That was the problem. So you just there's no way one can target sanctions at a particular audience. Maybe only some people will suffer less, some people will suffer more from the sanctions, but eventually they will do a lot to change the mindset. I hope so, because in the long run, everyone will feel that the economy is going down and starts to question why.
No, but Alexei,
Mhm.
will the sanctions make people angry at the people who are imposing the sanctions, or angry with the government for creating the mess that led anybody to impose the sanctions? Which way will it go?
Propaganda will try to direct it the former way. The propaganda will do its best to direct all the dissent against the West, which it did since 2014.
And with what success? I mean, my guess is that the propaganda
I'm
is
afraid
working now.
I'm afraid, yeah.
Yeah, the
it's working.
propaganda is working, isn't it?
It's very high quality. It's very expensive, really, because one of the propaganda big shots, quite notorious one, he had 2 villas arrested on the shore of Lake Como in Italy. So it's you can imagine, it's like hundreds of thousands of euros. And then another 2 villas were officially owned by his mother, and Navalny and his anti-corruption foundation discovered that he also owned those 2 villas. So it makes a total of 4 villas, and that gives you a feel of how much propaganda pays off, and it's really high quality. I have to admit.
Mm-hmm. And it works.
It works.
Mm-hmm.
Because people, when I talk to people, so I decided to just talk to whomever I meet, and sometimes I write posts about that on Facebook, how I talk to people. I try to, even if I would like to hit them hard, really in the face, I make a point of really being friendly to them and trying to really desperately to convince them. I'm trying to invite them to talk and to think together. Be it like a salesperson, be it a street cleaner, or whoever. And what I hear back from them is just not their thoughts, but the exact words which you would most likely hear from the TV, like the whole blocks of phrases, the whole ready-made formulas. So it means that the propaganda is very, very effective by all standards. Unfortunately, I hate saying that, but
I would like to add a little bit to that. I like this question, and I think, first of all, I think that any communication today is very important. I'm not, it's easy for me, well, it's the reason I'm saying is I understand the situation in Russia better than most people in Kiev because I'm half Russian, half American myself, even though I've been living for 6 years in Kiev now and I'm a resident of Kiev, but I think I have a pretty good idea of the what's actually going on in Russia as well. There, I believe, unlike most people today, that it is extremely important to communicate, to send messages to Russian people, even if you get rebuffed, even if you get people very upset or very mad at you. For one simple reason, there is a huge distance between formal acceptance of the, in quotes, party line and the readiness of a person to make a deep personal commitment to whatever, big brother tells him. Today, after a month, more than a month of fighting, it is quite obvious that with the available means that Mr. Putin has at his disposal, he is not able to achieve the key objectives of his so-called military operation. And I even question whether he's able to achieve even very minor objectives, military objectives, or relatively minor military objectives, for example, in the Donbas area. This puts him in a very difficult position. He basically has a choice between either looking for some kind of settlement, obviously trying to save face at least to some extent, but basically going for a settlement that will be seen by people everywhere, including by people in Russia, as a defeat, or by many people in Russia. Of course, the propaganda will work to try to turn a defeat into victory and so forth. But the only other option that he has is to really go beyond the resources that he has at his disposal today. And that would mean mobilizing very many people to the armed forces. That would mean throwing whatever capacity there is to increase the production of armaments and basically putting the whole country into war mode, geared for war. And the only way he can do that is by selling to his whole own population the concept that this is going to be, this is like World War II again, that Russia has no other option, but it has to win, it's again, it's in this existential fight against, this West that wants to destroy Russia as a nation and so forth and so on, all that crap. And and basically it will come down to a simple question of how many people will be ready to not just formally accept what he says, not just agree and when asked that, we agree with our great leader's policy, but how many people will be really ready to make very serious personal commitments, very serious personal sacrifices? How many people will be accepting the fact that their children will need to go to war? Most of the Russian army today is, and most of the people that are fighting in Ukraine are on contract. So there are people that chose to, chose to be, part of the military, and it's a little different case. It's very different when, Putin will try to raise another million men, add another million men into his military. And in that case, it's a very different level of commitment that he will need to get from his people. And I believe that people that have been exposed to alternative information, even if they disagree with it, even if it makes them mad, when they're faced with these very serious choices, their behavior will depend on that. They might curse at you today, but if they get alternative information, the chances are that when it comes to their personal choice, their personal sacrifices, they probably will not be very enthusiastic. And then they will look for alternative information, because it's one thing when it doesn't mean anything, and you can, defend your country's position. It's another thing when this comes with a very high cost. And that is when you start to look for arguments why you personally should not be paying this high cost. It's a very different game. And
Thank you. That's really important to know. And I take courage, and I will keep pestering my friends who hate me because of what you just said. So thank you so much, Andre. Alexei, I was so glad that you were putting your thumb up and acknowledging that you agree with him enthusiastically.
I just want to finish. Can I just say a few more
100%.
words?
Yeah, we're getting close to the end, and I want to give Erica a chance, but go ahead.
I know, just a few more words.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to do right now is to specifically try to understand what messages can be most effective. And I will ask Alexei to, we don't have the chat, unfortunately, but to exchange information, because I think we can speak separately with him. I actually hope to have a kind of team that would think specifically about what messages can be most effective in this sense. Not in the sense that they're going to turn people around, but in the sense that they will make it more difficult for the government of Russia to mobilize its own population for a great and protracted war. That's the issue today.
Okay. Blessings. That's a great idea. You can put all of this conversation can go on after the this event, when I put the show on our website in a couple of days. I'll put it up. I think Wednesday we're going to put it up. So you will be able to post all the information and share information there, but it'll be very public. Put things there that you're willing to have everybody in the world look at. Chat is no good because
we're
it's
friends
only
on
for people
Facebook, so
here.
we can do it via Messenger or some other. We're friends on
Messenger
Facebook.
if you want, or
we can contact each other.
if you want to be private, you can exchange emails or something. Okay.
Sure.
I want to give
Thank you.
Erica, we're over time, or we're about to be, but I want to give Erica the parting, the final word.
Sure, thank you, Mika. Yeah, thanks a lot, madam. My name's Erica Simpson, and I'm a professor of international politics at the University of Western Ontario, which is in London, Ontario, and Canada. And I'm also the president of the Canadian Peace Research Association, and I'm the author of many articles on NATO and a book called NATO and the Bomb. So I have been on the media a lot in the last, since the war began, the day the war began. And I just wanted to give all of you some advice. I do have a lot of help from my university with a media relations officer who sets up interviews with CTV and CBC, but I also get contacted by Al Jazeera. I've been contacted by all the newspapers, Hill Times, Britta Column, and so on. So I do have, as my media relations officer says, the most experience of anyone in our building in terms of what are called media hits. And what strikes me when I heard the whole conversation today is you have to keep your message short and to the point. You have to keep it to almost less than 30 seconds. You have to think of your answers beforehand about what the questions are likely going to be. And then when they fire a question at you, you have to answer with what you want to say. Right? So I want to talk about NATO. I want to talk about the Marshall Plan 2.0. I want to talk about nuclear weapons. I know what I want to talk about, but what you guys do is you drag on way too long and they won't come back to you because they don't want someone where they have to literally cut you off. I have already spoken a minute too long. They would have cut me off, and I'm taped. I'm not even appearing on the show, so I just wasted all my energy. Particularly when the journalists contact you, you say what they want in one, not what they want, but what you want to say in one sentence. So you've got to get it down. And that's my main advice to you is do what you're doing, like Jez Littlewood, but you've got to cut it down to literally 30 seconds, because the attention drifts off. They aren't listening.
Absolutely.
Your audience is long gone. And you are not even going to be shown, not you, Jez, but all of us here are not going to be shown. And we're the peace activists. Believe me, the media wants the peace activists. They are going to get too tired of listening to the generals, and they are looking for peace. So I'm the president of the Canadian Peace Research Association. I can't keep up. I cannot keep up with the media requests. And I'm out in a remote cabin in British Columbia, and I'm doing this all from Zoom. So
Looks
all
like
I'm
you're
saying
in right downtown someplace. It doesn't look
no,
like
I'm way in a place called Gibson's on the Sunshine Coast. But my brother, we set up a Zoom room, and it looks all professional. And the backdrop is great. So this is not the normal backdrop. My hair is usually done. I have tons of makeup on, etc., etc. I just was got to come on and see and hear, and I listened. I heard so much about Russia that it was very helpful for me. So I just want to thank everybody for coming on from all around the world, and particularly Dr. Spencer, who's just a fantastic peacemaker, peace activist, and an academic. Thank you, madam.
That's sweet.
30 seconds is good for the media, but Andre and Alexei were giving us dissertations imparting quite a bit of information, which did take longer than 30 seconds, and we did need to hear it all.
Well, I enjoyed the whole thing, so I'm happy with everything. Thank you all. Project Save the World produces a 1 hour long talk show 3 days a week, usually on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You can watch them live there on YouTube and send in questions for each guest to answer. This longer show, the Global Town Hall that we've been watching, is recorded on a Sunday, but we're going to broadcast it on Wednesday this week and then post it there for permanent access on our website. This one is going to be numbered episode 430. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar or the name of one of the guest speakers. It's best to watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts if you prefer on our website. That's tosavetheworld.ca, because you can discuss them there on the public comment column under the video window. And in addition to these talk shows, we have conversations going on there all the time on that website. For there's a page with a public comment column for each of 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. If you're an activist, please share your thoughts about the show with the other viewers on a comment column. Our website is the place for dialogue about serious global issues, and we welcome you all. See you there.